And we're so happy to have you here. I'm Julia de Bonaventura. I'm a director here at JFF, and together with my colleagues, lead our Pathways to Clarity Work Coalition here at JFF. I'm really excited for today and to have our very special guest, Christy Specht, director from JFF Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, here with us to talk about work-based learning and career awareness and JFF-related work-based learning framework. The Pathways to Prosperity and Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning teams at JFF work closely together. We share an affection for work-based learning and I think have aligned beliefs about its outsized power in pathway systems and its ability to change trajectories or accelerate a person's path to a fulfilling and family-sustaining career. So we're thrilled to be able to showcase the hard work of that team here today for our community and collaboration. Turn it over to Christy. I'm going to share a bit about JFF and Pathways to Prosperity for folks who may be new to our work. JFF is a national nonprofit organization. We recently celebrated our 40th anniversary, and we're focused on driving transformation of our education and workforce systems in the United States in order to achieve economic advancement for all, with really a focus on this North Star commitment of ensuring that 10 years from now, 75 million people who currently are facing barriers to advancement will work in good jobs. And Pathways to Prosperity and our Education to Career Pathways work is one of the ways that JFF is working toward prosperity, as we love it all, launched in 2012. We work with partners across the country to support their efforts to build and design and implement education to career pathways that are supporting young people in connecting to meaningful careers and achieving the kind of economic security that they need to be able to have choice-filled lives and be able to think intentionally about their own futures, their own goals, and the kinds of lives that they want to live. We work with all sorts of partners, ranging from K-12 and post-secondary leaders to business and industry partners, workforce development, intermediary organizations, state and local governments, and national networks. I'm seeing so many of those stakeholder groups represented here in the chat today as folks are introducing yourselves. And a cross-sector strategy is such a critical approach for this work. It shows up in how we interact with the field, in all of our place-based or state-based work, and it's always a key driver of who is active in this work with us. And the foundational framework of P2P itself is organized into these 5 levers that represent strategies that support more young people to complete high school, attain a credential with value in the labor market, and launch into a meaningful career. Secondary and post-secondary is integrated in a way with aligned curriculum, credits, funding, policies, and practices. We care a lot about leaders that have a shared vision and collective responsibility and the policies that support and grow pathways. Intermediaries are critical kind of backbone and leaders in our pathways work. They bridge systems and build relationships and can really transform a vision into action in a community. Career navigation systems that help students understand careers and the labor market, that intentionally support them in building social capital and take a much broader approach that includes players from across the system. And then finally, work-based learning that is meaningful, builds professional skills and practical knowledge, and really widens and expands students' access to a new network of adults and peers. We engage with partners in a lot of different ways. The Pathways to Prosperity Network is where we do deep work with state and regional leaders to support their Pathways initiatives. We have this broader Pathways to Prosperity Coalition, which is open to all, where we offer events just like the one that we're having today, where partners can learn more about the work and hear about best practices that we've identified and surfaced through our network in their contexts. And then we do all sorts of work outside of the network construct with partners in pursuit of our North Star. So today I'm excited to turn it over to my colleague, Christy Specht, who is our resident work-based learning expert here at JFF, and she's here to tell you more about JFF's updated work-based learning framework. We'll hear from her for a bit and then make sure that at the end we have time for Q&A before we wrap up. So would encourage you, if you have questions that are coming up for you as you listen to Christy's presentation and you hear her insights, encourage you to put your questions in the chat along the way. Our team will be capturing them, and we'll make sure that when we facilitate the Q&A, we're addressing all the questions that have come up. So with that, we'll turn it over to you, Christy.
Thanks so much, Julia. And hi, it's great to be here with you all. My name is Christy Speck. Like Julia mentioned, I'm a director within JFF Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning. And we are really pleased to have launched the new Work-Based Learning Framework, which is an iterative version of the previous JFF Work-Based Learning Framework, which was built in 2018. So just to really anchor us, what my goal is through this presentation is to really provide an overview of where we're landing on what work-based learning is, right? The value it can have, to showcase the new framework and what we've included in the framework and the direction we've gone with it. And then also to kind of show you a couple elements of the framework, including our quality indicators and our program exemplars, which is new. As someone who comes from the field, right? I come from education, I come from workforce development. The question that I've been asked a million times, and I'm sure many of you have maybe either asked it yourself or been asked, is how do I do this, right? If I want to build a program, how do I do this? How do I do this intentionally? How do I do this correctly? What do I need? What are all the pieces? And while this is a hard question to answer because everything is so contextualized, what we attempted to do through this framework was to really ensure that quality is integrated into all elements of work-based learning and that you all can kind of understand where some examples of that sit in the field. So to really anchor us in the what, right? What is work-based learning? It's comprehensive career prep strategy, right? We are looking at the marriage of education and also real world career examples, workplace experiences, and how those two things really intertwine. And when this is really done well, you obviously can have really, really great delivery of learnings. You can have great development of practical skills, great growth of interpersonal skills, and also an understanding of what a person would like to do with their life, right? And how this really matches up with their skill set. Next slide, please, Courtney. All right, so the goals of work-based learning. One is to really anchor in careers, right? Understand, what does somebody want to do with their career? And through work-based learning, we see that as an avenue of practicing what you may do one day, and if this is a good fit. We always like to use the example of somebody who wants to go into medicine or be a phlebotomist, but is scared of blood, right? That happens. That happens a lot, actually, for young people. And so one thing we do is that, of course, we think about, yeah, that is a real world example, but it doesn't mean that that young person may not want to go into the medical field. Maybe they just need to be more administrative. But work-based learning allows them to see and practice that in real time so they don't take a pathway that can be far more expensive down the road. Also, to grow and create professional contacts. As we all know, right, it's who you know. And developing out your social capital and your social networks is so, so, so important for a young person or an adult to really develop out what they need and meet folks who can potentially provide them learning experiences and or employment in the future. And then lastly, it's to develop out your employment and technical skills. So it's all the skills that are going to really help you in the workplace, help you actually do your job, and help you actually apply what you're learning to the workplace. So it's really those three prongs, right? You're looking at understanding who you are and what you want to do with your career, who you know in your network, and then how to do it. Next slide, please. All right, so this is our new work-based learning framework graphic. And this can really conjure up a lot of different thoughts from everyone. One, when we were building this, we wanted this to mean, to potentially mean multiple things to different people, right? So when I look at this, for example, I see a cell with a nucleus in the middle, and that career awareness is that middle. I see an earth with career awareness at its core. I see a metro map, and career awareness is that major metro station, right? You can see many different things, but ultimately what we wanted to provide is a demonstration of the fact that work-based learning is not a linear strategy all the time, right? It oftentimes ebbs and flows. And as much as we would like it to be a linear strategy and a very flat way of saying, hey, you enter here, you exit here, we understand in this world that's not always how it works. Most of the time, it does not work like that. However, we also understand that with work-based learning, that before you can do anything else, that career awareness is at the center. And I'll go into a little bit more detail in a bit about that, but that from that percolates out all the other different ranges of opportunities that you can have, hypothetically leading to employment at the end. But again, you can ebb and flow. And pending the sector or the industry that you're in, sometimes it's required of you to ebb and flow. I come from really working with tech. And if you are in the tech sector and trying to do a flat linear strategy, that does not work. Sometimes you're going to jump from an internship to an apprenticeship to a survival job back to an internship, right? Sometimes it moves like that in order for you to get ahead in the tech sector. So we think about this as really a journey, and the work-based learning journey is adherent to the fact that many folks are taking many different pathways to get where they want to go, but that at the center is the understanding of career awareness and that continuous learning that happens every day for all of us in what careers mean and what careers are out there. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to move relatively quickly through these for the sake of time. And these are a little bit wordy slides, but all of this is available on our website, and I'll give you the link to that in a minute. And just want to anchor in on what we kind of see as career awareness. And this one to me is a little bit of a funky one. And the reason why is because that after a lot of research, a lot of conversations, right? Career awareness is one of those things that we really more see as an educational tool rather than a work-based learning experience. And the reason for that is that career awareness really is just the education of, hey, I just learned about the option of a career or a sector, right? When we're looking at career days, career fairs, research, career counseling, right? The activity that that involves may just be going to a career fair or going online and looking up what does this career mean. So when we're thinking about career awareness, we don't quantify that under work-based learning. We quantify that as a precursor to work-based learning. And I think that's an important place to anchor, because oftentimes what we see across different state policies is that career awareness can count as work-based learning. But I challenge the audience, and I also challenge any sort of partners that we've worked with also in thinking about, does a student have more depth and understanding of who they want to be with their life and understanding of what that really means just by going through a career awareness activity? Not necessarily, right? So we do, of course, amplify that this does have to happen, and it should happen, right? Every day, sometimes we are learning about what careers mean. My career has changed multiple times, right? And a lot of people, your careers do change. They ebb and flow. So we see this as just a constant kind of permeating part to everyone's life, that constant knowledge, constant growth. But it doesn't necessarily quantify as a work-based learning activity in our eyes. Next slide, please. All right, now we kind of start with more of the activities, and this is career exploration. These are more lower touch, meaning they're more short term and they have less expectations post completion. So with career exploration, these are going to visit a company. These are, shadowing someone on the job. They don't necessarily mean that somebody's getting hired right after, and they're normally pretty short term. It also is more introductory, right? You're learning about, is this a good fit for me, right? When I'm walking through this office, do I feel like this is something I feel connected to? Do I feel really disconnected from that, right? If I'm walking through a hospital, am I having a hard time walking through a hospital? Maybe this is not a good fit for me, right? It's also where you start to learn some of your introductory skills and begin to kind of make connections to individuals in the sector or field. Next slide, please. All right, career preparation is more long-term. It's not, I wouldn't consider it always long-term, right? An internship can sometimes be 2 weeks. could be a year long, right? Internships, though, under career preparation, internships are hypothetically not a permanent employment, right? Neither are pre-apprenticeships, work-based courses, service learning fellowships. Where we lean in with career preparation is that these are most likely, or if we'd say optimistically, they are financially provided, or you're receiving some type of incentive, financial incentive to do these types of opportunities. And it's where you begin to apply some of the skills that you've learned. It's also where you can really begin to bolster and grow your knowledge about a sector or field. You're practicing things. You're having a stronger identity, and if this is a good fit for you because you are practicing it in the field, you're applying some of the learning that you may have learned externally, maybe through college, secondary, or through a training provider of other kinds. And you're also really just increasing your network, right? You're really being able to say, hey, I demonstrated my skill set to this person and they vouched for it. And I can use this person as a reference for my next opportunity that I'm looking forward to. But this is really that middle touch, middle ground, middle engagement opportunity that we see as incredibly valuable for any age learner, any sector, to really think about how they can grow their skill set on a temporary basis. Next slide, please. All right, career experience. This is the big kahuna. And this is your long-term work-based learning activities. Registered apprenticeships, for example, would be considered this. And also transitional jobs, OJT, incumbent worker training. The real component of this that's important is that these are leading to jobs, permanent employment, right? So a registered apprenticeship program is an employment opportunity. If you're part of a registered apprenticeship program, you are employed with a company, you have a job. However, it is still considered a training program until you reach journey worker status. And the reason why this is considered career experience is because you are really ultimately marrying at the top tier your education and your workforce training together to lead to permanent employment, even if you are actually in a job in that moment. Same thing with incumbent worker training programs, right? The idea is to master your skill set so that when you finish the program, you are at you have met all the competencies of somebody who would be coming into this job from the larger like workforce system. You have trained up so that you are fully proficient in those skills. Additionally, what we like to think about, because as you saw with the framework and the graphic, right, it's a circle. So you can ebb and flow throughout, right? But sometimes you go through some of these programs and maybe you want to go a different direction or you want to advance in your career, and that's fantastic. We, of course, at JFF think about lifelong learning as so significant. So this is also an area where you are thinking about planning for growth and planning for, hey, now that I'm in this career, how do I continue to really grow and strengthen and become, a leader within my career or my company or my field? Next slide, please. All right, so this is a brand new feature of the work-based learning framework. And these are our quality indicators. The quality indicators were vetted through a lot of different research. Our team did a year's worth of research, to be totally honest, on what sort of buckets can really ensure that we are making sure that a work-based learning opportunity is not just a work-based learning opportunity for the sake of it, right? As someone who's built work-based learning opportunities over the years and has also been federally funded to just like go get numbers, right? As maybe many of you on this call may have funding like that right now. We wanted to make sure that this was not just a flat program and that we are building something that was truly ingrained in quality. And so these are our 6 quality indicators. I'm going to briefly go over them, but I will give you some more about them in a minute when we go through our exemplar. One is universal access. And this is really thinking about wide range recruitment strategies and how we can really be proactive of reaching out to different communities that may not have access. I think about promotion on LinkedIn as really a non-universal access tool, right? Promoting on LinkedIn is fantastic, but there's a lot of different sectors and individuals who don't use that, right? So how are we reaching those individuals? How are we using a range of tools to really promote different activities so that there is universal access? Intentional alignment. So this is the intentionality of making sure that anything that you're learning in the classroom pairs up with what you need to do in a workplace. So it's that contextualized relationship between education and workforce, and making sure that that's really that marriage is strong. Next is financial support, and this can be wages, course credit, credentials, whatever type of incentives that are really valued for by the employer and by the learner. And we spent a lot of time debating this one because financial support, of course, it's ideal that of course, we want all individuals going through work-based learning to get some type of financial support, but sometimes it doesn't always work out like that. So if financial support is not able to be provided, what other types of incentives can be provided to really ease a learner's journey so they can go through a work-based learning program and complete it, and find the value and really commit to it at that time so that they're not feeling the pressure to have to leave to go make money elsewhere. Fourth is personalized mentorship, right? This is really that while you're working within a company or you are taking a work-based learning opportunity, that you have someone that takes you under their wing and really kind of explains what's going on, how this can really apply to you, learn from someone in the field, etc. When we're thinking about a registered apprenticeship program, this is required. A personalized mentorship opportunity is required through that. And we also that's not just a best practice, but something that we really are intentional about building out with an employer and with a learner. Pathway integration. This is so that whatever you are learning in the classroom and the field can actually roll up into a credential or degree. So that pathway that you are working on has an end result, right? You are not just going through a training program with no portable credential at the end that you can take from place to place. So we want to make sure that whatever you're building really does have a home within a system in itself, or that you're building a home for it within a system. And then lastly, collaborative partnerships. So this is really thinking about all the different players, right? I see in the chat, some of you are from education, some of you are from workforce, some of you are from post-secondary, secondary, etc. And all of you, I'm sure, have had challenges in partnering with different entities that you are supposed to be partnering with on the ground, right? Making sure that those collaborative partnerships, at least for the learner and for the employer, are in place to showcase a streamlined effort is so important. I'm probably preaching to the choir on this one. You all know that and probably live it every day, but we of course see that as a deep quality indicator. Next slide, please. All right, so these are our work-based learning exemplars. I love that I get to put their logos up and showcase them. And the O is John Overton High School. You know, that could not be a more open-ended logo right there. Anyone could think that's anything. And what we did was we did interviews with many different organizations that were providing work-based learning. We wanted to find a comprehensive grouping of employers, secondary, post-secondary, workforce, nonprofits, and associations to really demonstrate the full depth of where work-based learning is offered and how individuals and organizations at all levels are offering work-based learning very intentionally. And so all of these programs were vetted by, yeah, if you know, Jerry, you know. And so all these programs were really vetted very, very thoroughly. And what we did was we walked through the quality indicators with every single one to understand how these programs were being provided, how these organizations were providing programs that matched with the quality indicators. Something that was really important from our learnings that we didn't expect was that we thought we were going to go into these interviews and that, like, you know, I'm making this up, but let's say Bolt, for example, that Bolt would say, oh, we only do 2 of the 6. And Definition would say, only do 4 of the 6 quality indicators. And what we learned is that all of them did all 6. And it was streamlined and so important to them that all 6 quality indicators were naturally built into their programs. We didn't expect that initially when we were having these conversations. We thought we would find exemplars in a range of quality indicators, but then we learned that it just really was so, it's all 6 really do roll up to providing the most comprehensive program they could provide. So these are exemplars. I'm going to walk you through one of our exemplars. Next slide, please. which is Coalfield Development. Coalfield Development's out of West Virginia and really focused on advanced manufacturing, construction, energy. I love that when we worked with Jacob, who is heading up Coalfield, he mentioned that they're working on solar, and that his talk, his kind of language that he used in West Virginia was that really solar heats the ground to make the coal that West Virginia is ingrained off of or built off of. And I just thought that was so interesting in how he was navigating energy conversations in a coal state. And ultimately, they provide a range of different programs, and they are focused on serving some of the hardest to reach individuals and individuals with very high employment barriers. But they provide really dense programming and also a lot of wraparounds for them. So as you can see, they're providing a series of different types of programming. We're going to move you over to the next slide, which is how they are doing this on the field and how they're ingraining quality indicators into their work. So one with universal access. I'm trying to speak as quickly as I can. One, they are very intentional about what types of organizations they are reaching out to recruit individuals. They also are working with folks who are maybe exiting the system, individuals who are about to drop out. They're working with a lot of different folks in different ranges of skill sets, where they are in their life in general. And that is part of the design of the program. And also, they're working with corrections as well and how they're reaching out to these programs. So they are really, really intentional about making sure they are reaching out to a wide range of folks. Intentional alignment. One, and I know it doesn't say this in the slide, but they mentioned this in a conversation I had with them, and that is that they are working very deeply with employers and LMI data at large to curate their set of programming. So everything is really designed by employers for employers, and that they are really matching what that educational component can look like for them. Financial support, they receive a wealth of wraparound supports, whether that's transportation, whether that is stipends, supports with housing, all different range of wraparounds based on the need of the individual. They are curating those wraparounds for that individual. Mentored support, Coalfield themselves helps with the mentorship and the support, and they help to ready employers for what mentorship and support can really mean. Pathway integration, they're stacking their industry credentials, working really closely with unions and other apprenticeship programs, right? The fact that they're working heavily with the trades, you have the unions at the table, and with manufacturing as well, high demand in West Virginia. And so they're working really intentionally with these providers to train up individuals to source them over. And the union partnerships helps with that stability for these folks. And then collaborative partnerships, right? Programs are co-designed with 90 businesses, which is incredible. And they're working with collegiate and trade schools, obviously the trade schools for the construction component, nonprofits and workforce organizations that are really referring folks over, and to help supply those wraparound services. So I just went as quickly as I possibly could, and maybe did that a little bit too fast, Julia, I'm not sure. But that's what I have for this presentation. We would love to pass it back to you, Julia, and then navigate what types of questions we might have in the chat.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you so much, Christy. There are some questions coming in. I'm going to stick, because this slide is up, I'm going to stay on this one for a moment, but then Kathleen, I definitely see your question, so we'll get back there too. But Meredith is wondering if you know more, could say more about how partners are readying their partners for mentorship, what kind of like supervisor training or any other kind of supports folks are offering.
Yeah, I know that there are technically companies that will do this for, like, you can pay them a fee and they'll do this. They're like small kind of consultancy type companies. That is probably not within the budget of most people as they're building work-based learning programs, but that is a real thing. Otherwise, I think about DevMission, which is one of our exemplars, actually does kind of a training for their employers and requires them to go through a training with them where they really talk about who their students are, how they can work together, what that line of messaging is. and what these students really need, or young people, I should say. Dev Mission is focused on 16 to 24-year-olds and individuals who may or may not be finishing their secondary or post-secondary education. So these are going to be a range of different individuals with a range of different skill sets and credentials. And so they sit down with every employer and they provide that type of training. They meet with the manager, they meet with the individual who's actually signing on the paperwork to do a pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeship, internship, whatever it is, but building out the partnership. They also work with them on the hiring component. For example, a lot of young folks, of course, may not know how to go into an interview. And what Dev Mission will do is meet with the company ahead of time, prep them on how they're going to co-interview the young people, right? So that Dev Mission can kind of get them ready, and then actually really will give them to the employer, let the employer interview them as is, and then have that open dialogue. What the employer normally kind of comes back with is, oh, I see it, right? I see how maybe junior this person is, or I see how hungry this person is, or I'm excited about this person. And then what Dev Mission will do is then curate kind of a second round of resources. And then once at that point, right, you have staff at the company who have seen these folks go through it, and they are support and they're willing to really go, oh, I understand maybe what I need to do to get them from point A to point B. And Dev Mission also meets in and curates ongoing trainings with them as they go through programs, and they continue to engage them. They do some of the best employer engagement strategies I've seen. They have really personalized approaches, and that speaks volumes because those companies come back, even if they have challenges with a worker or a work-based learning participant.
That is so cool to hear. It's also just, I mean, for a young person, we all remember our first interview, and it feels risky, right, to have your first engagement with the professional world to be one that's unsupported. And so to have Dev Mission, it sounds like being so kind of like to provide the right kind of supports in place so that a young person is getting feedback on that interview and then customize kind of supports after that. Um, I feel like, a, a, a bad internship or can really change a person's kind of understanding of who they are in the world of work. And so supporting that in a positive way is really awesome to hear. Many years ago, I actually worked at the Boston Pick, who's one of your examples. And I remember doing supervisor trainings and at the hospitals here in Boston and trying to take, a developmental perspective and share with supervisors that these are teenagers and they have, risks and assets that are associated with their developmental stage. And it's really critical to arm adults with that kind of information so that they can best support a young person's journey. Okay, we've got a lot of questions coming in. Maybe this is a quick clarifying one, but Kathleen's first question about the definition of where internships fit in the framework. If you could just reiterate where they fit and what they are, and maybe like why they're placed in where they are.
Yeah, so internships are placed in career preparation because of the length and intentionality, right? Internships are not intended to be a full-time job forever, right? You don't do an internship and never stop doing it, hypothetically, right? Um, and hypothetically, they're not intended, some are intended to lead to full-time jobs, but they're not always, right? Where we look at a registered apprenticeship program, that is the intention of what it is at all times. It's intended to be a full-time job. It's intended to lead to a full-time job, whereas internships are not. So that's why it falls within that. That doesn't mean that an individual is not gaining valuable skills and experience and all of that, but it's really about the touch and the length of time and what it is intended to provide. Um, Also across internships, there's really no, this is something we hit all the time where it's like, we've been asked before to build internships in a box for a company or internships in a box for a sector or a school. And it never really works that way because internships are different across every company for every single user, right? Because you are normally working around somebody who's in school or just got out of school. Or if you're thinking about a returner, right, an adult who's coming back to do an internship, they have other priorities in place for sure at that point in their life, right? So internships are not intended to be the end result. They're intended to be a step. And not the final step necessarily, although they can be. So this is a question we've actually gotten a couple times, right? Where it's like, why aren't they on the experience end of it? That's not necessarily the intention of an internship at all times, but it can be sometimes. So we do understand that. But it's also not always going to be a forever opportunity, nor should it be, right?
Yes, internships in forever.
Life.
Yeah, for life. Um, all right. Brett and Ashley are both interested in if you know any examples of service learning or co-op work experiences that you could share. And then I will put in the chat. JFF actually, I think today came or recently came out with a report on kind of service core programs. So I'll make sure to find that and put it in the chat in response to you too. But yeah, Christy, anything to share?
Yeah, so actually I was just gonna say, I can link it for you, Julia. I have it up because it is it's from our core network. I'm gonna put in the chat. That is a really long link. I'm sorry about that. But this is really going to be my colleague Vanessa Bennett led this work. She is our resident in-house service learning pro, and she really authored this report. I would adhere to this report before speaking over her on any of that because that is her area of expertise, and she just released this. So I would recommend you look at this for all of that. I also know Maryland has a really interesting kind of service learning model where they're actually trying, and I saw that we had somebody from Maryland on this call potentially. But the state of Maryland is trying to really have a strong service learning model and bring in apprentices for service learning. As many states right now are experiencing, right? There's some hiring freezes and a little bit of a stall on how that may look. But we are seeing that kind of play out. And I will be working with that office on how to really ingrain registered apprenticeship and service learning together for a really strong collaborative model. So I think there's a lot still to learn in that space. But also, I would say that is my colleague Vanessa's expertise, and I would recommend you read this article before I speak against or over anything and give an example that's maybe not the best.
Great. Thank you. Okay. And now the measurement question or questions. There are a lot of those coming in. And maybe just generally stepping back, like how, maybe how would you characterize the challenges that folks in the field have around measuring work-based learning? And then are there any promising solutions you've seen or strategies that people have embedded into their work to really understand both? I think we see a lot of participation, measuring participation, but not necessarily quality of the experience. So curious what you would say about just kind of the measuring work-based learning conundrum that so many partners find themselves in.
Oh, yeah. And this came up too when we were debriefing on after we built the framework on where we would like to go next. And everyone was like, measurement, 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 right? How do we really measure? Part of why we landed on 6 qualitative measurement tools is because the quantitative was kind of impossible to do universally, right? Because our framework is not intended to be for one sector, for one age group, right? So if I'm thinking about how work-based learning rolls out at a nonprofit training provider, their access to specific data and ability to collect it is different than a workforce board right offhand. Same thing as secondary and post-secondary, right? Under regulations under different states, you may have requirements as a secondary, post-secondary institution to provide certain work-based learning modalities. And that regulation may not apply to an association or a nonprofit, right? So the metrics become wildly challenging to have across, which is why we leaned in on quality. What we did kind of hope to happen from the quality metrics was that people could anchor their quantitative in the qualitative. So for example, with the financial, for example, right? Let's just use that as an example. With the financial incentives, is that if you had an internship program and 5 of the individuals in the internship program were considered low income, how were you providing supplemental income so they did not need to leave the internship program, right? How were they being paid in a way where they were enticed to stay in that program and complete that program? And then post completion, was there a survey done? Did they feel that they had an experience that was positive and that they learned something? But also, when we're thinking about work-based learning, it's not just the learner, it's the employer and it's the intermediary as well. And I think we overlook that a lot of times, right? It's obviously, and we have this at JFF, right? A very learner-centered approach. It should be a learner-centered approach, but you also have no learner-centered approach without an employer hiring that person or paying the wages. And so it's important to understand that unilateral, that duality that exists there, right? What is the satisfaction of the employer? What is the satisfaction of the learner? And with work-based learning, it's kind of squishy sometimes, right? You can have a really great internship and decide not to go that direction. Does that mean it failed? No, not at all, right? I've done internships that I'm like, no. But like, yeah, I met some really great people and like I learned a really cool skill, but like I don't want to be a data researcher, right? Like, or a data analyst or something like that. That can happen. And so that's where the quality indicators were really intended to be that kind of, I'd, well, dare I say framework when we used it, when we built a framework, that kind of, that box, right? Of how are we kind of putting in individual quantitative metrics within a qualitative stance? How are we feeding that in and using those as the boxes to kind of collect certain information? We have talked about individually how to really build out some variation of a quantitative measurement tool because that is asked about. And it is absolutely something missing. And the reason why it is missing is because of the challenge in unilaterally saying this is what a valuable work-based learning experience is, because it is so subjective to the individual. And so I do think that there does need to be a good balance of qualitative and quantitative data, and that data is really storytelling. Because some of the apprenticeship programs I feel like I have stood up and worked with over the years, it didn't matter that the employer thought it was hard. They brought on a new person that they loved and they kept, and all of that other stuff went away. And so I just think about some of that data as collecting data. If it's not telling the story you need it to tell, some of that data can actually cause a little bit more harm than benefit, in my opinion, right? Or be more of a burden. I know that wasn't the answer maybe you were looking for, but I do think I do genuinely think, right? I've run apprenticeship and work-based learning programs and built them all over the country. And sometimes what we see is genuinely that data can sometimes actually tell a different story than maybe the value that somebody found out of it, or the other way around, right? So it does need to have a dual approach to it, no matter which direction we go. But that is something we're going to keep working on. And I'd be open to ideas if anyone has them.
No, I appreciate that, and appreciate the example of an internship where you don't pursue that field is not a failed internship. We all have had those experiences and seen that for students and learners and workers. And I also appreciate the kind of emphasis on it has to work for the employer and what the understanding what the benefit is to the employer. It's connected a bit to a question here in the chat from Zenobia. Given the current slowdown in the job market at this time, how are employers responding to this approach and to invitations maybe, or offers to engage in work-based learning? Do you have a sense of, I know that's a bit of a broad question, but like the employer appetite for engaging in work-based learning at this time, given or when there are labor market circumstances like the ones that we're in right now?
Yeah, what's really interesting is that yes, there's definitely a slowdown, but there's also an increase in certain occupations or certain sectors. And and even, I mean, I think that what we see, right, is that there's a slowdown, but there still is, of course, an aging workforce. You still have, less individuals going through higher education than maybe we had anticipated, and taking additional training routes. And so thinking about that is enticing to employers, because the normal avenues that they may take to find workers may be difficult for them, especially if it's for a sector and or field that nobody knows about, right? when we think about semiconductor, a semiconductor means a million different things to a million different people. And it can include many different skills, sectors, et cetera, rolling up into semiconductor. But nobody really knows what that means on the ground. And so if you go to a college and say, do you want to work in semiconductor? They're like, what is that? Right? That's not necessarily talked about. So I think that employers are still trying to have to figure out how to stay competitive, especially if they are in, an energy, the semiconductor, any of the manufacturing, any of these sectors that have historically not really been, I don't want to say not been around because they've been around, manufacturing has been around, but they've changed a lot, or there's just a bulk um, investment in the space. And so the need is changing and greater than it was before. So we actually do have a lot of conversations. We actually had one earlier this week with a big firm in Texas that was like, we want apprenticeships everywhere. We don't know how to source people. So it's really just kind of changing under our feet. And oddly enough, work-based learning is still one of the biggest. I mean, at JFF, it's the thing everyone wants to talk about, not just internally at JFF, but when we're working with funders or employers, they want to talk about work-based learning. And maybe it's a what and how, but they're wanting to talk about it. They want to learn more. So I do think that regardless, right, it's the appetite is still out there, very much so. And that oftentimes, I mean, as somebody who worked in the apprenticeship space for a long time, you're playing the long game right now, I think. I think everyone right now is playing the long game. You have to kind of ride out this labor market. You have to kind of ride out what this all means for hiring, knowing that it's kind of really, really wonky right now. Um, and it's about those continued investments in relationships with companies so that when they do come around to hire and or provide work-based learning, you are there to help them with that. And that is what I'd recommend, even if you're getting no's when you are asking people about work-based learning. And I think it's about curating work-based learning to be the most meaningful for the company and for your learners, right? It's not about forcing one type of work-based learning into the equation. And I know that can be harder for secondary and post-secondary than others, but that's truly what I think is maybe the most useful.
Yeah, I hear all of that. And I think, when we when we think about what's happening with online talent kind of recruitment processes for recruiters who are, only sourcing talent from the internet, that I think folks are just inundated with bots and fake resumes. And so that, the tighter connection to your talent pool that work-based learning offers, I think is really attractive, could be really attractive to companies. There's a question here that, and we're going to take about 5 more minutes for questions and then we'll wrap it up. But question from Matthew: how do you encourage career exploration among working adults? How feasible is it to ask somebody with a full-time job to find time for something like job shadowing? I love that question.
I do too. I love that question, and you teed me up for something I didn't mention earlier, and that's the stackability of all of this. So one of the things that some of the exemplars do, and I'll mention DevMission again because they do this very well, but DevMission actually ingrains those exploration and preparation activities into some of their career experience activities. So I don't think it's about doing one over the other or saying, hey, you're just going to go do a job shadow. It's about baking a job shadow into a pre-apprenticeship or an apprenticeship or an internship program. It's about that stacking. And that's where I think it's maybe the most useful for adult learners for sure, is that it's ingrained in a program that they're going to go meet folks, but they're still part of maybe a pre-apprenticeship or an apprenticeship or an internship. I do agree that just starting out and saying, hey, you're an adult learner, go do this simulation, right? Like is maybe a hard sell for some of them. And it does probably need to be part of a larger training program or other paid work-based learning opportunity. Whereas for young people, you can probably have them go do a job shadow. Maybe they're supposed to be at school that day and they're going to do a job shadow instead, right? So the intention of this is that you also can really think about how to stack and bake some of these shorter experiential opportunities into the longer term ones. and how to make sure they're as robust as possible by baking those things in. So baking in company tours to an internship, that's probably a no-brainer. Many of you probably already do that. Baking in those job shadows into an internship pre-apprenticeship program. I know that, so we have some programs that demonstrated doing that for us when we were talking about the quality indicators with them. So that's what my recommendation would be, especially for adults, right? It's that ingraining of the different opportunities into a longer term paid opportunity. Otherwise, you're right. It's a little bit of a hard sell to do that unless they just happen to have a free day to go do that.
Yep. Yeah. I wonder if there's also space for, and this is connected to a question in here about like leveraging out of school time partners and their space in the framework, because I think, there's a way to build up the capacity of other types of organizations like faith-based organizations or, community centers and those kinds of kind of like community-driven organizations that an adult worker might come into contact with in just their like normal day-to-day personal life, and how do we include those types of organizations and relationships in the work-based learning and kind of career development conversations. So somebody might, have they might go to church on Sunday and have a career exploration experience as a part of that kind of engagement. I know that there may be folks who are thinking in that way, but I think it's a real opportunity to really broaden who we think about as part of kind of the work-based learning and education and career pathway ecosystem.
I love that you mentioned that. And also, I think it's important, right? I think sometimes in education and workforce, right? Like we have a tendency to think that everyone has to do everything a little bit, right? Like that if you're putting a student in a place of employment, the employer should be doing X, Y, and Z all the time, right? Or that in the school, right? Employers look at a school and they go, no, you all need to be doing X, Y, and Z all the time, right? And I think sometimes we forget about how many different entities kind of affect our learner, user, worker base that we're supporting all the time, and that there are ample ways of receiving mentorship or supportive services or career engagement that we may not be able to quantify into um, that person's lived experience and journey, right? And that's where also measurement becomes really hard, right? Is that career awareness at its core is a living, breathing thing that we're all experiencing at all times, right? Like every day that I open up or I look on LinkedIn or whatever, and I see something new about AI or about different jobs, I'm learning myself what that even means. And so measurement becomes a little bit more challenging with that at its, with that kind of constant breathing cellular level of engagement. So I just
Mhm.
think it's there's so many different ways our learners and workers are supported and are receive new information about their life, and it's or what they can do with their life. And I don't know, I'm going down a rabbit hole of like good vibes in this moment, but ultimately I just think it's really incredible that everyone can you can
Could
learn in
use them, I think.
ways. You can learn in so many different ways, right? Like it really is, it's not everyone's job to do everything. And people also will find their purpose in a lot of different places that sometimes we just can't even capture it all.
Yeah. Okay, last question, and then we'll wrap up. And you mentioned this a little bit, but I know you just released the updated framework. But where are your wheels turning next for what might be next for you and your team as you think about what the field could benefit from?
Yeah, we're definitely thinking about metrics, right? That's something that our team is very much focused on. We also are thinking about how to really understand other exemplars in the field, because of course there are more. And I just want you all to know, we know there are more. Some of you on the line may be exemplars in this moment. And we just did not have the ability to put them all on this website. My Marcoms person was like, absolutely not. You cannot put 20 people on here, right? But we also felt this was a great starting point. We also really want to have some of our exemplars further unpack, right? We have a lot of folks in the field, again, asking us how, how, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? How do I contextualize this? And I want to encourage folks to reach out to some of these exemplars if you can. to learn more, right? Some of them are more than eager to share what they've done. Coalfield, Macne, Dev Mission being those three I know will for sure talk to you. Actually, maybe if I send them like 50 emails, maybe they won't, but I hope that they do. And also, I think that we're thinking about how does this work aligned with corrections? That's one of the things we're also engaging, right? How are we supporting reentry and that population? And how can work-based learning really be utilized in corrections, which is a really challenging kind of new agey space for them. So that's another area that we're engaging in right now.
Well, thank you.